I
Yeah,
want to get in now to Russia, China. I think that many people view
yeah,
China as the biggest threat to the United States, our biggest
yeah.
adversary in the world. Russia, kind of probably in that two spot. What is
hmm
your as a experienced submarine commander who did this
hmm
for decades? What is your assessment of the Chinese and Russian navies sub in their submarine fleets, and which one should concern us more?
Yeah, it's a good one. I think they're both on equal footing in terms of overall threat to the United States. Russia has way less submarines than China does, but I would say that their operators are more trained, have more reps and sets. Their submarine force is older. They're skilled mariners. They're definitely formidable. And set aside the Ukraine war, Russia's been quietly building and modernizing their submarine force and associated weapon systems. So I think a lot of people don't talk about that. You and I don't see that in the mainstream media. So I as a professional recovering submariner, I would say that we've always held a healthy respect for our Russian friends. The Chinese are different in that they're building a very big navy. A preponderance of their submarine force is non-nuclear in terms of nuclear power. A small amount is nuclear power. And kind of going back to the previous question you asked about the importance of a triad, I think the Chinese recognize that too. And they have, in my opinion, global ambitions. And, preponderance of their nuclear deterrent force is ICBMs. So they have land-based missiles, which constitutes the preponderance of their nuclear assets. Um, they have several Jin-class ballistic missile submarines. However, they're in the process of modernizing and building a next class, and they have cracked the code also, and they have you know submarines that perform similar undersea deterrent missions that we do. So they're clearly building towards a triad or triad-like strategic deterrent model. So it's very clear to me that, excuse me, if our adversaries are in this case the PRC is willing to do that, then they clearly see the advantages of having more than just a monad or one leg, and how survivable that is. So that is not lost on us as a nation. It's very clear to me. I think a lot of people, when we talk PRC, United States, the topic usually hovers around Taiwan. This necessarily isn't what I'm talking about, is not Taiwan per se directly. I think it's the greater, preservation of the Chinese Communist Party. They want to preserve their state the way it is, and the way to do it is through deterrence. And that's clearly the direction they're going, as evidenced by, what's available in the public. You and I can Google this stuff and it's out there. Um, yeah, a friend of mine, Tom Schugert, he's a big thinker and into strategy, and talks often about this. He's been on Fox News, I think, and CNN, some other outlets. He does some great analysis on the People's Republic of China and their capabilities. But yeah, those are the two big, nations out there. And from a submarine perspective, you know, I think there is something to be said about having a lot of submarines, not necessarily higher capable sailors like the Russians, but they're out there and they're continuing to modernize and try to get better. And the part of the world they operate in is very congested. It's a tough environment to operate in. Our submarines have operated there for decades, and it doesn't make it easier, by the way. That's in fact where, that part of the world, the Western Pacific, is one of the toughest parts of the world to operate a submarine in. And so that adds the complexity, from my perspective.
I've got to ask because I interviewed some pilots not that long ago, and they talked
Mhm.
about what they would think of a direct air-to-air engagement with the Chinese or the Russians or whoever it might be. In
Yeah.
your professional expert opinion, if there was a direct naval engagement between
hmm
Chinese subs and American subs, and let's say surface ships, whatever it might be,
hmm
who's going to come out on top?
Well, it depends. I would say us. And when I say it depends on the type of encounter, right? So, anti-submarine warfare, I think a lot of people think it's just a submarine going against a submarine. That's not always the case. I think, you know, a lot of people don't realize this, but anti-submarine warfare doesn't mean it's just sub on sub. It could be aircraft, it could be surface ships employed working with submarines. I think we bring a lot more training capability and understanding to the fight, and our operators are trained better. And I think we would fare on the winning side of that. However, I caution that with it all depends on what you show up to the fight with. I would say I'm still convinced that we have an edge, but if we don't continue to stay on top of things, we don't continue to train, we don't continue to invest in the training, the technology, the platforms, and the capabilities, that edge is going to erode. And that's my concern, when we talk about defense budgets, is where are we investing our deterrent capability as the United States? It's not just strategic deterrence, but it's also conventional deterrence. How do we as a nation send the message to Xi that today's not the day, dude? You know, and to do that, as a nation, we have to make some decisions on how we do that. And I think, we've invested rightfully so in the undersea domain, and we need to continue to do that because I think, the submarine warfare provides the United States an edge. We call that, in a lot of respects, an asymmetric edge, and it gives the president options that would not be on the table if we didn't have our platforms.
So if I put you in charge right now, would you advocate for building more submarines or improving the ones we already have to counter China? What would be the best way to go about making sure that they're never on equal footing?
Yeah, it's a good question. Let's just set aside all the variables, the politics, the money, the federal budget. King for a day question. Those are always awesome. Unconstrained environment. Yeah, I'd build more submarines and modernize the ones I have, and see if I could extend the life of them. The problem we've had as a nation is because of history and the timing of the history. We drew down from the Cold War, so our submarine numbers dropped, predominantly attack submarines. And then, we entered an age where the other part that I didn't talk about, the unintended consequence of the peace dividend was we drew down the number of shipyards that could build nuclear powered submarines. It turns out, fun fact, nuclear powered submarines require a little more detailed work in order to produce them and to operate safely at sea. So, there's a couple extra steps in the building process that, we need to do to make sure those little guys go out to sea and are safe. And so that requires more money because, frankly, getting in the nuclear club is a pretty expensive club, but it's an exquisite technology, and to have that is a strategic edge for our country. So we've made those decisions. But yeah, I would definitely invest in more submarines. But the big thing that I would also invest in is not just that. You can't just produce capability overnight. We need to rejuvenate our public shipyards and our private shipyards. We've lost a lot of them, and we're only down to a handful. And we need to reinvigorate our industrial base. That would be something I would put a lot more investment into if I was, given the purse strings to do that. I think that's something that's often not discussed in the public forum is the Navy's need to have a robust industrial capability to build not just submarines, aircraft carriers, destroyers, frigates. If we're going to have a Navy that's viable for power projection around the world, you've got to have an industrial base to back it. And for years we as a nation made a conscious choice to spend our money elsewhere, and that has now, the birds have come to roost, as they say, or whatever the saying is. But basically, we're now in the process of playing catch up. So that's ultimately more submarines. We're pushing for that. The Navy continues to do that, which is awesome. I fully support that, and getting our industrial base rejuvenated, and it creates more jobs, frankly, in America. And I think that's good. We need to definitely continue to do that.
I agree with you. And I think that I'm so glad you made that point. I think the industrial base not being maybe what it should be is a
Hmm.
huge national security threat that nobody seems in the mainstream media to talk about much. One of my
Yeah,
favorite stats ever was at the height of World War II, the U.S. was rolling one B-17 bomber off an assembly line per hour. So that per hour. So when
yeah,
things are rolling, the ability of the
yeah,
United States to produce weapons and tools is unlike anything I think the average person can imagine. So great point. 100% agree.
Yeah.
I would now want to get into when we first talked, you were talking about the autonomy that a submarine has